Everybody, my name is Lydia Reilly. I am a food innovation and technology specialist in the business support team in SRC, and welcome to this Wednesday webcast. In today's webcast, I am going to give you a little bit of an insight into our project-based support that we offer to food businesses and getting them to an innovation capacity to meet their goals for new product development, new process development, and I suppose giving that in a real life scenario of a project. So nearly like a case study of what support I was able to give to a food business in order to make the reality of a reduced sugar jam a possibility for them to add to their product list. So Rachel gone through in the last webinar what support we have on offer. So I suppose very much taking her approach of the structured MPD process development stages and how we can bring that ideation stage for a business right the way through to a successful commercial scale launch. So as I mentioned, today I'm going to give you a little bit of an insight into how to create a reduced sugar jam. So I suppose taking it right back to the client brief. So getting in contact with us at SRC, as Rachel's has went through in the last webcast, please do get in touch with us. We have a wealth of experience and knowledge within the team, and we are all too wanting to help and support you as a local business in order to meet your your targeted innovation and meet the capacity for that. I suppose gaining that little bit of support in that area is beneficial for yourself. I suppose just to get that structured approach to a product development ideation. So I suppose talking specifically with regards to the reduced sugar jam project, which I'm talking about, the client got in touch with me and they had a very clear, I suppose, outcome that they wanted from this project. They just didn't have the confidence or the technical know-how in order to make that a reality. So their want was to produce a jam that are healthier and reduced in sugar, and she'd already identified the target in a 30% reduction in sugar was where she would like to hit. So very much on that MPD process stage model, as Rachel went through in the last webcast, the ideation stage. So the client was aware of that their products were high in sugar. Without a doubt, I suppose at a basic consumer knowledge, you're aware that jams are extremely high in sugar. So I suppose she'd already identified this and she wanted to kind of get to a position of, how do I address this? How do I reduce this? How do I get a product that is more nutritionally sound? She had done a little bit of market research in the background and had identified that there was a gap in the local market for reduced sugar options. I suppose in general consumers have an increased awareness or a greater awareness of the nutrition and their food composition. And I suppose widespread a rise in cases of diabetes, which very much was fueling her thought process in this and communication with her customers at the market front stall, for example. I suppose the process challenges was where she felt the support from the likes of ourselves and the food innovation and technology team would come into play. How do I formulate that recipe? How do I actually produce this without compromising her finished product? She, I suppose, had established a lot of products within her portfolio that were selling well. Her setting and her texture of her jam was good. She had a good flavour profiles and shelf life was pretty stable. I suppose that challenge of reducing the sugar, what would that do to all of these factors, was a big concern. So very much into the project approach from my perspective. So very much identifying that structured approach to the innovation activity. Again, reiterating what Rachel went through in the last webcast, so please tune into that also. It'll give even more clarity, I suppose, on a wider scope of the potential for a project with ourselves to support you. So talking specifically about this project, it was very heavily focused on recipe development, ingredients, functionality, and theoretical nutritionals were going to be key in order to achieve that 30% reduction in sugar, ensure that we were actually have that clarity that we were making that a reality. Process development, having the process in place for current control jams. There was a clear process. I suppose it was amending that, or I suppose making tweaks, or introducing new processes to that facility and to that business. It can be challenging and it's a new way of working. However, having that repeatable and clear makes it achievable for the business to make those alterations. In order to reduce sugar in the jam products, there's a lot of technical controls from a preservation and a shelf life perspective that needs to be taken account of. So it's very much upskilling, or I suppose identifying what the purpose of these steps are, and making that clarity between the technical parameters of food manufacturing and also the inherent benefits of certain ingredients in a formulation, how they interact, and how that ends up in, I suppose, the composition of a finished product. So I suppose looking at your temperature monitoring, the water activity within jams, I'll go through all these in more detail, pH and finished product, so the heating and sealing of the product is key in order to create that stability for the finished product. So ultimately the main goal was to create a successful product that would be suitable for product launch. So just taking it back to the beginning, I suppose, with a jam recipe. So very much an artisan producer. So a very simple recipe, comprised mainly of your fruit, your sugar, pectin as a setting agency, and also then the acidity is key, which you've heard me mention there with regards to the pH of the jams being, I suppose, a critical control factor for both shelf life and also the setting, so your sensory analysis or your acceptability of a product. So just to, I suppose, bring that into that recipe development stage, so mapping out that recipe, what does that look like, having the control of that so that you have the awareness of what you've added, what your quantities were, so that you can, I suppose, record and have that legible for future developments to make those tweaks, or else to finalise and lock in that recipe and move that to the production stage. So you'll see on the top we've created a basic recipe. This was all based on a simple raspberry jam. You will see here there's raspberry sugar and lemon juice. Another element of this is, I suppose I mentioned to the left hand side, pectin is, I suppose, necessary for jam production. However, it is also an opportunity to reduce or remove that and create, I suppose, a full jam without its use. So you'll see here in this recipe the lemon juice has been included. So I'll describe that in a little bit more detail on how that helps support the setting of the jam. So you can see here we have around 56% of the core recipe was fruit content. The sugar content then was at about 40, above 40%. Looking at the reduced sugar, so we wanted to reduce that by 30%. Taking that into account, we balanced, I suppose, without adding any other ingredients. We wanted to retain, I suppose, the principles of a natural whole food solution to this jam. Increasing the raspberries and reducing the sugar was the approach we took in this scenario. So without a doubt, reducing sugar within a jam recipe is challenging. As you can see, it makes up a large proportion of that recipe. It has a number of functions within, I suppose, the formation of a jam-based product. So as called out here, there's numerous functions of what the sugar does within that jam-based product. So ultimately flavour, we're all aware of that. It imparts the sweetness of the jam, so that lovely sweet flavour that we attribute with jams wouldn't be possible without that. The texture and consistency also. Sugar imparts that textural control, so very much appropriate there in your sensory approach. Looking at your visual appeal as well, it assists with binding in with your fruit, of course, and creating that lovely glossy appearance that we all attribute with our jam based products. If you look into more of the technical parameters on the three bottom elements, so your fruit stability, so again a little bit with regards to your texture, it has, I suppose, imparts a little bit of a functionality of retaining your fruit texture if possible, so having those elements of your raspberry or your strawberry in larger pieces, if that was where you wanted to have that, or wanted a more smooth based jam, it has a functionality there. Very much, I suppose, appropriate is the setting or the gelation of your jams without sugar binding with your fruit elements within your jam products or your preserves. It wouldn't be possible, so the sugar forms, I suppose, a fibre network within the jam, binding to your fruit and the available water within that, and creates then that gelation effect. So your physiochemistry brings all of that in and makes that more viscous or thicker in texture. So that's why you'll have your moisture elements from your fruit, your sugar goes in, it starts to, through temperature heating and through the basic process, will start to gel and bring that all together. And very much, I suppose, of critical importance is it does have a large impact on your microbial stability. So water activity, I've noted that down below. So I suppose this is the technical aspect of jam production that is a challenge to meet and to keep that constant stability of the product. So what is a water activity? And I'll explain it a little bit as well. Is water activity is the available moisture within your product. So sugar has, I suppose, a soaking action. It binds to all that moisture and water within the product. If that water is bound together, so it's held in a really tight matrix as such, that means it's not free. It's not available for the microbes to then feed off. So I suppose this is where the key element nearly comes in with your reduced sugar jams. Reducing your sugar, increasing your fruit, you're going to have more moisture there. So your microstability of a reduced sugar jam is more complicated, I suppose, is the challenge. And I suppose in doing that, I'll outline through in a process now on how you can, I suppose, create that micro hurdle to reduce the effect of any products growing any within microorganisms within your product. And I suppose okay, so we have identified our recipe. So the next stage is making that recipe into a finished product. So how do we do that? So that's about looking at our process stage or our process steps to enable that finished product to be produced. So I've outlined the jam, I suppose, production stage in 10 steps. So that starts with taking the fruits in and then finishing off at a cooled, jarred, finished product that is ready for ambient storage. So let's talk these through one by one. So step 1 is adding your fruits to your pot, your pan, or in a larger scale manufacturing facility would be in the likes of your kettle or boiling kettle. You add your fruit in, heat your fruit up. The purpose of that is to start to break down your fruit from that raw texture down into a soft puree or pulp. Step 2 is adding your sugar to that. Albeit, yes, this is reduced sugar jam. Sugar, as you've seen in the recipe, sugar in the fruit, and also I suppose minimising any food spoilage or food quality concerns there with the likes of burnt elements or undissolved sugar being present. Step 4 is the addition of acid, or in this case it'll be lemon juice within our recipe formulation. As I mentioned, lemon juice can be utilised, I suppose, as an alternative to pectin, which I outlined in that formulation of the key 4 ingredients needed for jam. So your fruit, your sugar, an acidity agent, be it lemon juice, and then pectin. There is a natural level of pectin in fruit. It depends on what type of fruit you are using. It will have inherent natural levels that are higher in some elements and lower in other fruits. So again, we're using raspberry, which I suppose is treated as your soft fruit. It has a lower quantity of natural pectins within its composition. The addition of the lemon juice, bringing down that acidity, really helps the natural pectin within the fruit to create this natural pectin network, or that fibre network within your jam that helps with that gelation properties. So I suppose I'm utilising lemon juice on that front, and also, which we'll talk about in our control points as well, is to bring down the pH of our jam, or create it in, I suppose, that acidic environment. So let's talk about that in the next stages. Prior to that, we're going to boil all of those elements again together. So I suppose you've added in your acid with your lemon juice, bringing that back up to that continuous rapid boil at 100 degrees. Checking your temperature with a handheld temperature probe at this stage will be good. You don't want to continuously boil that. I suppose you then will be in the area where you are driving off more of that moisture, you're concentrating that jam down. It may then, I suppose, your textural elements that we talked about in a sensory point of view, it'll become really thick. It'll become really, I suppose, past the point of gelatinization. It will nearly become like a really sticky hard syrup, or I suppose nearly like a boiled sweet in that aspect, if you continue to drive off that moisture. So hitting your temperature, you've checked your temperature, you're at 100 degrees, everything is looking really good at that point. It's pretty much, you're at a simple, I suppose, quick method of doing this is you're at the point where you feel the jam is at a good set point. So it's about checking that, ensuring that you are at that good sensory quality that you want. I suppose you want to check that the jam is going to set in the jar. You're not going to be with a very kind of thick liquid as such, that you're going to have something that you can put your knife or your spoon in, and you'll be able to, I suppose, lift out the characteristic jam like texture, be that slightly softer set or firmer jelly like set of a jam. You can cater that to what you're looking for in terms of your end product. That's all determined, I suppose, in that temperature and time of hitting that 100 degrees. And I suppose your setting of that, if you were looking to get to a harder set jam, you would increase up your pectins within there in order to, I suppose, create that harder set jam. So checking, how do you check that? It's very, very simple. I suppose the tip I would use, which is, I suppose, pretty traditional, would be putting that on, I suppose, a cold plate or the cold back of a spoon, letting that set a little bit, and saying, okay, is my jam holding itself in terms of, is it held in one kind of element, is it bound together, is it gelatinized, or is it running away on me? So I suppose if it was running away at that stage and it wasn't setting when exposed to cooler ambient temperatures or cool temperatures, to speed up that process of checking the gelling, continually to boil that a little bit longer, typically around 5 to 10 minutes would be ample to just condense that down a little, and I suppose create that texture that you're looking for. So if you're happy with that, very much the next stage is into your technical kind of setting, and I suppose checking of the inherent qualities of your finished product are going to be suitable for your shelf life. So jam is a longer life product. You typically see it on the supermarket shelves or at your markets with a best before date. So that means you can hold that product in your store cupboard for a longer period of time. You're controlling the microactivity within that to ensure that it does last that 6, 12, 18-month period, whatever that might be for your product. One of the methods, I suppose, as we've explained, is having the lower sugar content, higher fruit content within your recipe. That creates a challenge within your microbiological, I suppose, growth phase that could be apparent within the product. You're reducing that, I suppose. You have a higher level of water there, as I said, you have a higher water activity, which I suppose creates that lovely, I suppose, nutritious environment for your microbial species to grow and multiply within that. But having I suppose, a number of control points, pH is one of them, is creating that acidic environment creates an environment where those microbial species can't survive, they can't grow, they can't multiply. So anything below 4.6 is where we want to target. And I suppose nicely with the addition of our lemon juice at step 4, we're creating that acidity, we're creating that acidic environment whereby we are reducing the likelihood of any microbial survival within the product. So I suppose checking your pH with a handheld pH meter, it's a simple, I suppose, quick way of assessing your stability of your overall product. It sounds technical, and I suppose getting, an understanding with the likes of ourselves on what is your target, what are you looking for, how do you check that? It's very quick and simple to do once you have the knowledge of that. So we're looking for the product to have a pH of below 4.6. We've succeeded in that. Typically within this set of products, our pH was around the 4.4, 4.5 mark, which yes, albeit is just below that, but it means it's within that tolerable kind of pH where we are minimising our microbial risk. So we've done our checks, we've hit the critical temperature. Our water activity we know is slightly higher in this product, but we have that control because we still have our sugar there. The fruit's going to bind with the sugar. Our pH, we've checked it, it's below 4.6. I suppose the next stage is your jam's ready to be jarred. Step 8 is hot filling. So again, another way of reducing our microbial counts is hot filling that into a jar, having your sterilised jars ready to go, and filling those hot. And sealing minimises, I suppose, any kind of growth phase within outside the tolerable temperature limit. So anything around body temperature, anything above that 37 degrees up until 72 degrees is ideal scenario for microbes to grow. So if you think about it, if we kind of let that cool down, it might be sitting at around 60 odd degrees, we jar that, you've nearly encapsulated all of that microactivity within that. So by hot filling, we're still going to be close to 100 degrees, our jars are sterilised, we're lidding immediately, so we're not going to get any of those environmental microbial species that may be in the air or maybe from you handling the product, etc. within your environment. They're going to be minimised in terms of entrance into the product. So sealing those, getting a really good tight seal on the jar and lid is also, I suppose, essential. Next stage is a slightly, I suppose, an additional step again. So we've hit our critical temperatures, as I've mentioned. You're minimising, I suppose, the survival of any bacteria in there. You're controlling your water activity. Your pH is sitting, I suppose, within the tolerable limit at the acidic end of the scale. You've sealed your jar, you've hot filled and sealed. Taking that one step further and putting that in a water bath, I suppose, to get an in-jar pasteurisation. So this again will minimise any microbial growth within that. And very much, I suppose, this is the additional stage I would advise in that reduced sugar jam formulation, just to minimise that, because I suppose you've reduced your hurdles in that your water activity is not going to be as controlled as would be in a full sugar version. So it just gives another level of security. Within that, it'll help also with the sealing of the jar. It creates a little bit of a vacuum, so you fill your water bath or your pot with water, and again bring that temperature up to above 75, ideally up to the 100 again, I suppose, as an easy way of remembering. Putting it in there for 10 minutes, keeping it there, it will sterilize nearly the contents, the external surfaces again, and also help with the sealing of the jar, so you have an airtight environment. Then it's about taking those out, cooling the product. I suppose your jams are ambient stored, so what does that mean? It means you can store them in your cupboard. You don't have to chill them, you don't have to refrigerate them, only after you open the product. So I suppose getting that ready to then sit on the shelf and wait for consumers and use is where you're at. So we have our recipe, we have the process in place. I suppose let's reiterate I suppose top tips for getting to that successful reduced sugar jam product. So looking at the temperature, your water activity, reducing your pH, and then hot filling will all be parameters that will enable you to get a successful, stable, reduced sugar jam product that's available for consumer end use. So your temperature, called it out again, reaching those temperatures above 100 degrees or to kill your microbial activity is key. So in the last process we've seen we're meeting that, we're hitting that twice as well within our process. So this will really minimise our pathogenic bacteria and also the spoilage organisms like yeast and mold. So really, I suppose, creating a stable environment, therefore minimising the effect of these microbiological species within your product. Controlling the moisture activity. So I've talked about this a lot. I suppose, what does that mean? I suppose in terms of doing that assessment yourself, it's not something you can do. You just know where you are with your recipe. Send that to a laboratory to get it tested for water activity would be key to understanding this scientifically. So I suppose as a quick lesson in that is water has a water activity of 1. So we're targeting for a jam-based product a target of a water activity anywhere between 0.85 and 0.8. So you're controlling the moisture in there. We know by reducing our sugar, as I've explained, you're increasing your water activity there. You're going to have more free water within that. But we know we're doing other things within the process in order to, I suppose, counteract the effect of that. So reducing our pH. We've mentioned this, adding the lemon juice, getting in an acidic environment. So that low acid environment challenges microbes to grow and multiply within those environments. They just don't like it. So really targeting in on getting a pH of less than 4.6 is where, for a microbial control perspective, we want to be sitting. You probably say to me is, but I don't want my jam to taste acidic. I don't want those bitter flavours coming through. And I know that does sound low, and I says we're controlling that, but the flavour of your jam will not compromise in that. I suppose doing the sensory and taste analysis of that will prove that to yourself, but really getting that controlled, your other flavours will ride over the acidity within that. It's more of the physiochemistry within the jam, I suppose, that you're targeting in on. So we've controlled that. With this series, I suppose, as I'd said, working with a specific client, we were able to achieve a jam pH of around 4.4, 4.5. So falling just below that 4.6. And then again, hot filling, post sealing. So putting that in the water bath or putting that back into, suppose, a water bath environment of a pot with water. Heating that back up to 100 degrees. Submerging the jar in that high temperature water will help with the sealing, as I mentioned, and then again really just reinforcing that kind of control of your microactivity in there. So you're sterilising nearly the jam product in situ or in packaging as well. So just to reiterate, those control points of your temperature, your water activity, your pH, And then again, your sealing and your heat treatment of finished product are all going to be really good control mechanisms for you to get that successful product outcome. So at the end, the outcome, maintaining your food's safety and also your quality of your jam, ultimately the taste and the appearance of your product is what sells it to the consumer. And we're preventing then the growth of microorganisms, which is going to improve your shelf life. As you know, you want to have the longest shelf life you can on that. If you have a product with a shorter shelf life, you're going to incur more waste. If that product's not sold within that time, it's unsafe for the consumer potentially, but it really impacts on your cost of goods. So what were the outcomes of this project? So it was a successful reformulation of the range of jam products. So we hit that target of 30% reduction in jam products across her portfolio of flavours. Really positive in terms of the taste and sensory perspective of the jam. So there was a clear preference when we did a sensory panel for the reduced sugar jam. So I suppose given the confidence in that, we were able to retain the, I suppose, good sensory qualities of that product. Feedback was that the characteristic flavour, so that fruity flavour, was more predominant within the reduced sugar. They still tasted sweet, so there was no compromise in that. Consumers weren't feeling like they were missing that. They did feel though it wasn't as intense, which was taken as a positive in that there was many feedback saying, you know, you got that sugar taste first instead of the characteristic or the fruit flavour that was the jam was produced on. And then process development, so we've walked through that stages. So there was very, I suppose, easily adapted and implemented within the current production environment for that business. So taking those controls over the temperature, the time of cook, the pH, the hot filling, all of those elements were very achievable and I suppose responded in easy adaptations within their process. They were more technically aware the next stage as well, so they're technically upskilled in the areas of product reformulation. They were given the confidence, I suppose, as well to make, you know, they had the ideation there in this scenario to make that a reality. So they were able to understand their product shelf life, their nutritional content there. They were upskilled in those technical parameters that they wouldn't have been otherwise. So I suppose taking this, having our support as an SRC food innovation technology team, we can very much support you in getting that innovation activity in a structured and formalised approach, interacting with you in order to make, I suppose, your goals a reality and get that launch into, I suppose, the commercial or market, whatever that might be for you. I suppose having a look next at just some quick video shots of, I suppose, the active implementation of these might be useful for you, but I'll leave it with, as Rachel had mentioned in the previous webinar, who you do feel, albeit jam might not be, I suppose, the area you're working on, but if they're, you know, your food manufacturer, artisan producer, please do get in touch with us. We're more than happy, I suppose, to chat with you and get an understanding of yourself and your business and where you're looking to go and give you that support that you may be looking to take a business to the next stage. So thanks for tuning in.